Welcome to the Let's Talk About It podcast and YouTube for those that are listening on YouTube and getting to see our beautiful faces. Today on the podcast, we have such a special guest, Dr. Margaret Nagib. She is a clinical psychologist specializing in Christian counseling, inner healing, and personal and spiritual development. Her passion is partnering with Holy Spirit to restore wholeness through a deeper relationship with God, helping each person reclaim their identity, purpose, and passion. I got to personally know Dr. Margaret for counseling, which you're going to hear more about here in a few minutes. But everybody say hello. Here's Dr. Margaret. Hi, Margaret.
Hey, Kate. It's so good to be with you.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, this is so amazing. It's amazing that this is what the time and season we're currently living in has done, is made Zoom more real. But you already use Zoom a lot for counseling, right?
I do. Before this, 80% of my clients, now 100% of my clients. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so we're going to get into it today because I'm going to ask some questions that we get asked all of the time. And it's basically about when and why do we need counseling when it comes to our sexual histories and our sexual stories. So here's a little background for everybody listening to how I met Dr. Margaret. And maybe a little like oomph in your step, because a lot of times what happens, at least for me, is people hear our story. And most of the time, because my husband and I share our story so vulnerably and openly and normally share too much information for people, they're like normally identify a lot with parts of the story though. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know somebody else has gone through this, or I didn't know this was possible. And they say, where did you get counseling, or how did you get it? Because every time we try to talk to somebody, it feels like nobody knows what we're talking about. And so my situation with Margaret was actually sitting in my small group room, like living room of my friend's house, telling them like sexual struggles I was having inside of marriage, and I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I need help. I need to revisit some of this stuff. And so my friend introduced me through Zoom to Dr. Margaret. So I think one of the first questions I want to ask you from your perspective as a counselor who's constantly getting new patients that I'm sure sometimes they're like very hesitant, or it's new and they're like, I don't know how to do this. Like how, like what, when, why, how, like where should they start? Why should they start? Just giving some like even language maybe and freedom for people to understand, like it's not because you're so messed up, or it can be like simple things that you're just like, man, this one part of my sexual life with my spouse isn't working, or I'm single and I have these different issues from my history with sex. Should I talk to a professional, or like, am I just fine as I am?
Well, I'm a little biased. I think everybody should go to counseling.
Yes, I'm biased.
And that's just because counseling can be beneficial no matter what.
Yeah.
But you're so right, especially if you've never done it before. It can be really scary. It can feel like, does this mean I'm crazy? There's something wrong with me. You know, it's not that bad. And really counseling is great because it's an objective person. It's someone outside of your world. Like your small group is awesome, and it was perfect that you were bringing it up there. And then there kind of feels that there's that sense of like, I need more. I need someone objective. I need someone maybe with a professional with some more information for me about whatever topic I'm struggling with. But usually what I tell people is just give it a try. Like, counselors are the most warm, empathetic, open, inviting. You can be yourself. I mean, that's the goal of counseling, is a space where you can just be yourself and learn and grow and explore with someone who is going to make you number one and has some information for you that can really help.
Yes.
So it doesn't hurt to give it a try. Get referrals from other people.
Yep.
You know, that helps me if I'm hiring a plumber. Like, I want to know that like you had that plumber and you thought he was good or she was good. So there's a lot more people in counseling than you think.
Yes.
And just ask for some referrals from friends.
Yes. And breaking off that negative stigma of like I'm the only one. Like, so hearing that, I remember the first time, which this was years before I met you, the first time I ever went to a counselor, the idea of asking somebody for a referral felt like so exposing. Like, oh my gosh, we're pastors and we're going to ask for like a reference for counseling. Or I remember sharing it on a stage for the first time, like telling people that we were in counseling. Like, I finally, once I realized how life transforming and helpful it was, then I wanted to break the stigma everywhere. But I just knew, like, you're kind of walking on eggshells telling people, like, we're going to counseling. Like, there's no crazy infidelity, there's no crazy addictions. It's just little things that most of us think are little, but the roots are deep.
And the stigma is changing, because I'm getting a lot more pastors actually who are coming to me saying, there's really no major problem. I want to be healthy, and I want to prevent, like, I want to be healthy enough to avoid problems, which I think is so amazing.
Totally. Yeah. So obviously we could talk about a million different reasons and like paths of life that bring people to counseling, but being Moral Revolution, we like to focus on the sexuality part because it's more rare to hear that part of the conversation. And so one of the questions I always ask people is like, what is your sex story? And normally people are like, what are you talking about, my story? But it's like, we all have one. We all have a story of when we were introduced to it as a child. Was it negative or positive? Any experiences we had as a young teenager, our marriage, if you're married, like we all have a story. And so I think knowing that regardless of where our sex story falls, I think sometimes, at least this is what kept me out of counseling for years, is I thought mine wasn't that bad. Like if I compared it to what I saw in the movies maybe, or if I compared it to a friend that had a story that I just thought was like so terrible, like I can't imagine if that happened to me, I kind of disqualified my sexual experiences and my story, thinking it wasn't that bad. So that's what kept me probably from getting help and really seeking out healing. I didn't know I needed healing. I just thought, well, I had these experiences, like get over it. So I think I would love to hear you speak to that too for people. What are some of the things that we can even kind of name some scenarios, experiences that it's just like, how can people identify looking back at their sex story from childhood, from teenage years to where they're at now? Because maybe they're not even having major issues now, but it gets triggered, from past things. Is when, where, why do we go back and look and say, oh man, I would love to deal with the roots of that part of my sex story?
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of times when people come, they're not coming specifically with that.
Yeah.
They're coming with anxiety, they're coming with depression, they're coming with exhaustion. And then as we explore, it's like, oh, okay, this is definitely affecting, your sex life. Or maybe there has been some trauma, some experience, or some belief from your past. So everyone's a little different. Some people come in really anxious about something. Maybe they're anxious about pornography or masturbation, or maybe they've had a sexual trauma. It's very, very common that I have wives or husbands come in and say, we've been married for 15 years and we've never really had a good sex life, or I have no drive, or I'm fearful, or I have thoughts that I don't want during sex. Yeah. And so, we often start and just say, well, tell me a little bit about your experiences, the understanding you've had. What's the first time you remember really thinking about it? What's the first time it felt scary? Or, really just trying to dive into what's your experience, and how is that negatively affecting you today? Yeah. And then can we write a new story? So oftentimes with couples, for example, I'll say, okay, this has been your story of your sex life up until now, but guess what? We get to close that chapter and write a new story. You get to make your sex life what you want it to be. And so I'd love to help you heal. And this is for anyone. We're all sexual beings, right? Whatever it's been up until this point, let's write the story with you and with God. How do you want it to be? And if we have to heal stuff to get there, we're going to heal stuff to get there. And you're going to get knowledge, you're going to get information. And the cool thing, the reason why you pay a counselor, Kate, is because they know how to get you from A to Z. Yes. Right? You've tried your best. And that's usually, come to a counselor when it's like, you've tried everything you know how to try and you're still stuck. That's the best time to go see a counselor.
That is so good. And even thinking like we started at the beginning of, like, your friends are limited. Like, they can love you and encourage you and know, oh, you need more help. So maybe you have talked about it. It's not something that's necessarily a shameful secret that you've never exposed, which if you do have those, then I recommend definitely going to counseling. But maybe it's something you're willing to share, but you're like, man, but nobody's like, I don't know how to get to the next point. And even my trusted friends or parents or mentors or spouse, like, nobody knows how to help me. It's like, that's when you go to get the help, have the conversation. Okay, so I want to dive into a little bit more about specifically my situation and exposing something called trauma, specified around sexuality, because I think it is, I'm sure for you, it's something you're talking about, on the regular, but I think for the majority of us, we don't even know what that means, what that looks like, how to label it, how to recover from it, how to just any of it. So my first time going to a counselor years and years ago, my first moment, she labeled me, I mean, I guess, but more like diagnosed me.
Diagnosed, yeah.
Yeah, labeled is terrible. I meant diagnosed. With PTSD. And so that post-traumatic stress disorder, I was like, what? I had no clue about trauma, about the, everything that now I have way more knowledge of walking out. So I would love to just dive into maybe even just if you want to start maybe exposing or sharing what trauma could look like in a sexual history or in a relationship or anything like that.
Sure. So, I mean, you can go online and look up the symptoms of PTSD, but to really kind of make it even more simple than that, you need three things for there to be trauma. It's like an equation. So it's it's events plus the experience plus the effects. So the events meaning something happened that you perceived as traumatic, right? So whether it's a date rape, or it can even be, unfortunately, like ongoing relationship dynamics that are unhealthy, an event like a fire or someone dying. There has to be some kind of event. It's either a big T, like a car fire, or you were assaulted, or it's a little T, where, it might not be some huge event, but it could be some kind of ongoing thing that's smaller. Then there needs to be effects. So you have to have some kind of negative consequence because of it. Anxiety, depression, irritability, inability to sleep, a sense of anxiousness, all the time, flashbacks, nightmares. So two people can go through the same event, but maybe not have any negative effects, right? Or experiences of that event. And then the last one is so experience and then effects. So some kind of ongoing problem. With sleep, with arousal, with all the different symptoms that go along with trauma.
Yeah, that's so helpful. For me, like my story, for those of you who haven't heard it, is we can use it as maybe an example to unpack a bit. But I think I never would have labeled mine as trauma because I just kind of said, well, it's not as bad as other people's, or it was my own choice. Like I wasn't date raped, but I was, pressured and manipulated for 45 minutes, feeling like I can't escape from this. Or just the social pressure of, well, all my friends are doing this, so I must be messed up if I don't want to, or this is how I keep a guy. So those were my like underlying things of thinking, well, it was my own choice. So that couldn't be something that's trauma or big T. But it's the only way my body experienced sexuality was in moments where I was freezing up and hated everything, but had to pretend to enjoy it. So maybe speaking to that a little bit for especially even females, like girls listening that are like, oh man, because every time I share my story, I have so many girls that are like, I identify so much with your story. So maybe just even speaking to that a little bit.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that it was not a big deal, because really you had two things going on that actually made it more complicated for you. So you had the actual events of trauma. So trauma is too much, too fast, out of my control. So the minute someone manipulated you to do something sexually that you didn't want to do, that was too much, too fast, and you felt like it was out of your control.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it was someone that you knew. So there's the trauma of an event, like being pushed to do something you don't want to do. But then there's the trauma of attachment in a relationship, where this is someone I know, this is supposed to be dating, it's supposed to be okay. You're learning about relationship and you're having attachment trauma based on how someone who's supposed to care about you is treating you, right? Wow. And then what did you do? If you're forced to do something that you don't want to do, your body's going to brace itself, right? It's going to do all the physiological things of, I don't want to do this, but it's happening, and so I'm going to brace myself. And then over time, if that isn't processed, your body continues to do that. So a woman who's married to her husband, who's amazing, who would never hurt her, but then in sex, her body is triggered by similar environments, a bedroom or whatever it is, and her body starts doing what it did before, which is bracing itself, getting anxious, clamping down, or whatever it was given the situation, fight or flight or freeze.
Yes.
So it's now no longer about the event that happened to you with your boyfriend 10 years ago. Now it's about your body stuck in that experience from 10 years ago and unable to release and come back to relaxation and that the sense of I'm okay.
Yeah. That's so huge for I think some of our listeners to hear, because I remember being in that and thinking like, why can't I get myself out of this? Like, I do trust him. I do love him. He's never been with anybody else. Like I had so many reasons to not have my body reacting like that, but didn't have the knowledge and information to understand why. So then it made him feel like something was wrong with him. He wasn't enough. Then I feel like I'm just like, I'm making him pay for my stuff and I don't even know why. So it was just years of this battle of not understanding why I couldn't overcome it. So even simple things of him coming up behind me while I'm washing the dishes and rubbing my shoulders, my body would go immediately into that, because mentally I'm thinking he only wants one thing. Like my mind and body had been so trained to believe that I was just an object, that it's all lust. There's no love. It was like I just had known lust for so long I couldn't believe love was real. So I think it's so amazing for listeners to hear and understand that might be in similar situations of, wow, I just need to go and do some healing work to get out of this. I'm not used goods that I can't heal and recover and write a new story. But yeah. I think for me too, I love sharing with people because it sounds, when they hear that it's possible, sometimes we don't talk about the hard work that it takes. I remember years ago when I first went to counseling, I would like hope she would text me and cancel like every day. I was like, I hope she has to cancel. I don't want to do this.
Well, okay, you're bringing up such a good point, because one of the key symptoms when you've had trauma is avoidance.
Ooh.
Think about it. You've had this horrible thing happen to you, but now on top of that, now you have all this anxiety or a trigger. And so then you start avoiding. Maybe you avoid dating. Maybe you avoid, in your case, I'm thinking about a woman. Maybe you avoid dating. Maybe you avoid men. Maybe you avoid having sex with your husband, right? Maybe you dissociate or numb. Those two kind of go together. I'm either going to numb myself in some way and be asexual, or I'm going to avoid. So that's part of the problem when people do, not problem, but part of the things when people come to counseling, why it could be years and then they're just coming to me. It's because they've had that avoidance, which is one of the hugest symptoms with people with trauma is they want to avoid pain. So that's what you were doing. You were just trying to avoid pain.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah. I used to call myself a professional avoider.
There you go. But if you can give people a little bit of knowledge that I'm not here to re-traumatize you, because so much of what they experience, if they don't have the knowledge, just re-traumatizes them. So when wives come and go, well, I just did it anyway, even though it was painful because it's my wifely duty, they were re-traumatizing themselves every time because they didn't have the knowledge to address the trauma in a way that's not going to just re-traumatize them and make it worse.
Wow. Okay, so then I want to visit this part of it then. So for me, I had been through years of recovery. I did EMDR training. I don't know if that's what it's called, training, but EMDR therapy.
Yeah.
And I had been through years and I'd had such major victory to where my body didn't tense up. I was not in pain. Like I was able to relax, trust. Like I had so much breakthrough that then years down the road, I still wasn't enjoying anything. So that was a problem. Then years later, I started enjoying, but there were still things that I was like feeling triggered by. So when you said, a wife that might say, well, I just did it anyways because it's my duty. Like there were certain things in the bedroom that say my husband desired or wanted, or just different things to try out that I realized, I'm avoiding all of those things. And it was really easy to draw a line back to I'm avoiding the exact things that I used to like have experiences from as a teenager. So I'm like, oh, that's why I'm so comfortable in this, because this is still new to me with him. So that story is written with only him. But
Yeah.
anything that linked to those past experiences, I was like, no way, like, get away from me still. So it was so painful because I had arrived thinking, like, I've done all the work. I've done all the painful things. I'm so messed up. Why do I have to do more? Like, it just felt like I'm starting back at zero. Like, so many nights of just crying of like, I can't believe I have more work to do. But that's what brought me to meeting you, because I was realizing that these certain things that were triggering me that I didn't like was specifically drawn to that. So I think speaking to the idea of it's a process, like there's probably, like, for me, and I love sharing with people listening, that it's like, it's a journey, that we live in a time where we want it fast, we want it microwaved, we want it to happen quickly, but the journey really is the hard work, the journey is part of the beauty, part of the healing, part of the freedom. Like, I know what we worked for and fought for is so worth it, but just sharing that it's so worth it to revisit, that it's not like, oh, now I'm so messed up because I have to do more work or I have to revisit something else.
And that was that shame talking again. So I've never, ever seen trauma, no matter what kind of trauma. I mean, it could be even a car accident, that kind of trauma, not sexual. And shame gets attached to it. So when that came up, it wasn't even about you doing more work. It was it was shame coming up, saying, I'm not good enough. I didn't do it good enough. There's more to be done. I'm so horrible. I have to do it again. Whatever.
Yeah.
So recognize that too. It's all about knowledge with trauma. You need that knowledge. And then it is a process, but when you have that knowledge and you have someone guiding you with that knowledge, it goes so much faster and so much smoother than when you don't have that knowledge and you're just kind of bumping up into things and figuring it out as you go along.
Wow.
So in addition to working with trauma, meaning the event and so much the body's response, and helping the nervous system heal, I'm helping people understand when the shame is coming up, because the minute you have shame, it gets in the way of getting to the goal that you're trying to get to, which is true with everything, right? If shame's involved, it actually sabotages you in the process. So helping people separate the shame, separate the event, and then separate my body. My body is just having, responses. And so I'm helping my body calm down.
Wow, that's so good. The link of shame to trauma and how shame sabotages. I'm like, yep, that's what it does. It tries to keep you stuck and keep you in that cycle. Wow. Wow. Okay, I want to wrap it up with this. I remember we've had conversations before, part of Sex Church Culture too. Dr. Margaret was a guest with us for that event. And I remember when you spoke there, you shared something about like the timeline with trauma, like within 6 months, like there's a differentiation of how do you deal with it. And I think it helped me recognize, oh, so if something happens, even as a parent, like something that is an event that's traumatic for one of my kids, like, oh, let's deal with it quickly. So will you share a little bit more about that, like the timeline of when it happens?
Yeah. So if some big event happens, actually having community, being able to cry it out, talk about it, feel everything that you're feeling, feel the fear. Within the first 6 months, that's super helpful. And most people do fine. They have what they call a simple stress response. And then in a couple weeks and a couple months, they can be fine with support. But a lot of times, like for your example, this had happened years ago. And so now the brain starts to install that. It starts to file it away with all of the feelings and the sensations. And so at that point, you may need a little more. You need something that's going to address the body, not just the event. Because now, really, it's not so much about the event. It's now about this body. If the body didn't keep reacting the way it was reacting, you'd be fine.
Right.
You need that body work in addition, meaning someone who's going to help stabilize your nervous system so that's not triggered all the time.
Incredible. Okay, so I wanted to share this for the listeners because we are giving you a few minutes of a glimpse into trauma that you're probably like, I need more. That's how I am. When I hear something, I'm like learning about it for the first time. I'm like, I need to hear more. I need to walk through this. Dr. Margaret, like I mentioned, was a guest with us for our event, Sex Church Culture, which even though you missed the live stream event, it's available on moralrevolution.com as an e-course if you want to go ahead and listen to that with Dr. Margaret. But the most exciting news that I'm excited to share with everybody is next month, July 2020, we have Dr. Margaret joining us for the More Gathering, which is our first online women's gathering with Dr. Margaret, who is going to talk about the same type of stuff. We're going to dive into trauma a little bit more and then be just very specific about women and girls and sexuality. We also have Lisa Bevere joining us, Carrie Lloyd, Tanasha LeRae, and Reva Henry, and it's going to be an amazing weekend. And so I wanted to share it here just so that you guys here, you get a little glimpse of Dr. Margaret now, but join us next month to get more. We'll have some Q&A time as well. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Margaret. It's so amazing to really, I feel like it's like the tip of the iceberg. Like we just opened up a little bit about trauma that hopefully will start healthy conversations with you and your small groups or your spouses or your friends where you're like, oh man, I heard this thing today on a podcast. You need to listen to this. Or I watched this on YouTube today. And dive in and get the healing, do the work. Dr. Margaret, you have a book too, right? Souls Like Stars?
Yeah, Souls Like Stars.
Will you share a little bit about that book?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon or at the Bethel store, and it takes you through the steps of emotional health, but it does it with the Holy Spirit. So it's continually guiding through that. And there's a lot of stories in there actually of people with trauma and the tools, more of the psychological inner healing tools to get you through that.
Yes. So check out her book, Souls Like Stars, on Amazon. She's also, I don't know if she's available, but she does do online counseling. She's probably pretty full, but you can find her on Instagram or her website. Is your website Souls Like Stars?
No, it's thedunamisproject.org.
The Dunamis. Okay. We'll put that in the show notes for everybody. Okay.
Yeah, there's a contact sheet there. You can contact me through that.
Awesome. So we'll have that in the show notes for you. But thank you so much, Dr. Margaret, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Let's Talk About It podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Revolution podcast. For more content, visit moralrevolution.com and follow us on social media, pursuing God's design for sexuality.